Hello everyone, it's your host Mark with High Tech Tutorials, and today in episode 4 we're going to pick up where we left off from the last episode. And in that episode we created a custom playlist item decodable struct that allowed us to take our nice little flowchart that we were using here and create a structure that allows the decodable protocol to essentially parse this information the way we want it. So what we're going to do in this particular episode, last place we left off with our UI is here. We actually just have some test data. So we just have 5 cells displaying testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Where we want to leave off is be at a point where we have, at least at a minimum, our titles and our timestamp as well as our image displaying with our cells. So that's where we want to get to today. So first things first, let's go ahead and copy. We're going to copy all of our model data here. So if we come from this top struct here and copy up, I think up to that point is what we want. Okay, yep, up to this brace here. We're going to copy this and come back into our Swift News app, and we are going to create a model file. New file, Swift file, and let's call it a playlist item. And this playlist item, we can come in here and just paste this information. And this is going to represent our playlist item model. Now, this model is going to be responsible for essentially representing each piece of our data. So we have like our title, that's going to be our title, our description, that eventually is going to be this information here once we get to that. Our image URL for our image, our published date down here, and the video ID that allows us to play the video. So let us continue on. Now that we actually have our model in place, let's go back over to our playground where we did all of our heavy lifting, and let's actually copy our function that actually does the downloading. And we'll copy that. And what we're going to do is come back into our view did load of our view controller. And when our view loads, well, we're not going to drop it in there, but just after view did load, we're going to paste our download videos here. And when our view loads, we're just going to call that function, which is going to start the process of downloading the videos. Now that we actually have that set, and we have the download videos being called, what we want to do is when this data comes back, we're going to see here that we're going to get a bunch of items. We're going to want to store these items in an array so that we can actually display the information, because we have to provide our table view some sort of data source that says, hey, here's your data that you need to display the information necessary. And let's come over to the actual what we're working with. So here's where we are now. So what we're going to first do is come here, and we're going to create a variable called playlist items. And we're going to say that's equal to an array of playlist items. We're going to initialize an empty array of playlist item types. So now that we have that in place, we have something to store or store our particular items that we're getting back. Now, how are we going to do that? If we come down here, we can see right after this point is where we have, and I'm going to delete this information in here. And let's clean up some of these comments that we had from before. All right. So right at this point here, we have our response. Our response contains all of our JSON, right? So what we're going to want to do is, being that when this particular task kicks off, it's going to be on a background thread. We want to make sure that we don't try to update our UI on that background thread, as the UI needs to be updated on the main thread. That way the user doesn't get an experience where when it's downloading, because we're on that same that actual background thread trying to load our UI, essentially you'll get like a blocked feeling, like you can't touch or interact with the app because it's essentially working and it's doing one thing at a time. So what we want to do is kind of make it multitask. We'll jump into that in another video as far as like multi-threading and using different threads to kind of do work. At the moment, just take my word for it, and we're going to set up a dispatch queue. And in this particular block of code here, in this block, it's going to essentially allow our code to be executed back on the main thread so that we can update our UI. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to take this response loop here, and we're going to say here we can say self.playlist items, and we're going to append an item to it that way. So for each one of these items that we get back, go ahead and append it to our playlist items array. And when you're done doing all of that, we're going to call reload data on our table view. And that's going to give us all of the information necessary to populate our array. All right, so from here, we are going to, now that we have that set up, let's clean up some of this. All right, cool. And now let's get over here to our number of rows. Now, instead of returning 5 rows, what we want to say is we want you to return the number of items or the count of our playlist items. That's what you want you to return back. Cool. We have that set. And here we can say in our playlist item, let's go ahead and create a reference to a single item. So we'll say let an item equal our playlist items. And which ones do we want to access? Well, every single time we call reload data, this particular self-arrow at index path method is going to get called. We are going to essentially pass the individual row that it's currently on. That's going to give us access to which item. So for example, when this particular item is item 0, we're going to get the very first item in our playlist items array. So in this case, we're going to say, now that we have access to a single item, the title in our table, or not table, our self.item title label text, which is this guy here, we're going to want to say that this is going to represent our item.title. And for our timestamp, we're going to say this is going to represent our item.publish date. And if we run our app now, barring we did not make any mistake, we should have our titles and our timestamps. And sure enough, we do. So here you can see Swift 50. Now you'll notice that our image is still old because we're not updating our image, right? But if we look at our titles, Swift 48, Swift 46, and the timestamps. Now we'll also notice that our timestamps are not our nicely formatted timestamps, but we'll get around to that in coming soon shortly here. And we'll also notice that here there's a slight difference where we have this extra Swift News 44 text that we didn't have in our completed version, if you look here. So that's going to be some more formatting that we're going to do in some future videos here. But nonetheless, now that we have that set, what we want to do is we want to work on getting our image updated. Now, in order to do this, I am going to recommend that we use a library by the name of SD Web Image. So if I were to do GitHub SD Web Image, this is a wonderful library that essentially is going to handle all of the caching, downloading of our images so that we don't have to worry about that. Now, could we have written the code? Absolutely, we could have. But given the time constraints, I want to just kind of jump in real quick and use something that we know works well and go from there. So we can see here to install this, we're going to install it via CocoaPods. And so here's the pod line that we need, and that should be it. So to install such, what we're going to do is first initialize a pod in our particular repo. And once we have that, we're going to use Vim to edit our pod file. And if I hit I to insert, I can come down here, and what we're going to do is we're going to copy this text here and paste that there. And we're also going to make sure that we get rid of the platform piece, because that's going to be needed. And use frameworks is good. All right, so once we're good, we can escape :WQ to save and quit. And now that we've actually updated our pod file, we can run pod install. And what that's going to do is actually download the dependency necessary and create a XC workspace for our project. Now that that workspace has been created, we can come out and close our original project, because this is no longer going to be valid. And going forward, now that we're using the CocoaPod, we're going to be using the XC workspace project. So quick little shortcut to launch Xcode with that project. While you're in your directory, you can type in XED space period, and that is going to launch our project with our pods for us. So now that we're working with this workspace project that has our pod installed, and the pod that we're interested in, we could see here that we have our SD web image, and we have our SD web image pod here. We'll actually be able to go into our project. So let's come into our view controller in question, and we're going to import SD web image here. Cool. So now that we have that set, it's actually fairly easy to use SD web image. All we have to do is say cell.itemImageView, and SD web image has a method called setImage that we can call, and all we have to do is provide it a URL. Where do we get our URL from? Well, item.image URL. And as far as the completed block for now, we won't handle that. And with that being set, we essentially have everything we need in that one line to download, display, and cache our images. So now if we take a look, we have 54, 53, 52, 51. And the good thing about this library is once it gets downloaded, it gets cached in memory, so that as we scroll, we're not actually making additional requests to fetch this image again. It just retrieves it from memory, or retrieves it from cache and displays it. So that is a nice little quick video today. I wanted to at least get our UI updated and get everything set. So just to recap, we first created our model and brought our model into our app. So if we come over to playlist item, we brought over our server response and our playlist item, as well as all of our custom decoding code. And then we came over into our view controller and we brought in all of the actual function that we created in a playground to download all of this. Once we got that set, we were able to create a variable here to store all of the items that we get back. And within our table view, we now also tell it the number of rows that you're going to display is going to be based on the count of the items in our playlist items array. And then when we generate a cell, which represents one block of this thing here, each time we generate one of these cells, we say set your item title label to the title, set your timestamp label to the publish date, and for the image view, call the SD set image method. And once we provided an image URL, the SD web image library takes care of all of the heavy lifting of downloading and caching this for us. So in the next episode, we will hope to tackle our detail view so that we'll be able to tap on this cell and show the details and get close to wrapping up this app. I hope you guys are enjoying the series, and stay tuned for the next one.